All right, so we're going to be prepping for a metalworking lathe operator interview, and we've got all the RoleCatcher resources right here, ready to go.
Yeah, we got career guides, interview guides, even info on those AI tools they've got.
Cool. Let's jump right into this deep dive and figure out how to answer these interview questions like a pro.
It's kind of like taking a hunk of metal and turning it into like a precision part.
Yeah, I like that. So first off, what does a metalworking lathe operator actually do?
Well, it's way more than just spinning some metal. You got to set up the lathe, pick the right tools for the job, and make sure you really understand things like gear ratios and speed
So
ratios.
it's got to be really accurate.
It's all about shaping those work pieces with accuracy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not just running the machines, though, is it?
Right. You got to be inspecting the equipment, handling the finished pieces, and of course, safety is a huge deal. And all that stuff will probably come up in the interview.
Okay, so let's get to some of those interview questions. What's the first one?
All right, here's a classic they love to ask. Explain your experience working with metalworking lathes. It seems pretty simple, but it's your chance to really stand out.
So how do you answer this one without just giving them a list of your old jobs?
Tell them a story. Instead of just saying, I worked at this company for this many years, try something like, at my last job, I focused on making really complex parts for medical devices using a high-precision CNC lathe. You see what I mean?
That sounds way better.
It shows them what you can actually do and the kind of work you've done.
Exactly. So you're painting a picture.
Yeah, and always be ready for follow-up questions. They might ask something like, what type of lathe are you most comfortable using and why?
So you need to know your lathes. Manual, CNC, all the different types, and what each one is good at.
Yep, show them you really know your stuff. Okay, next question. How do you make sure your work is accurate when you're using a metalworking lathe?
Accuracy is huge in this kind of work.
Absolutely. How do you explain that during an interview?
What do you think?
I think you should focus on how you make sure the quality is top-notch. Talk about using things like calipers, micrometers, gauges, all those tools that make sure your work is exactly right.
Right, those are all crucial tools.
Yeah, and don't just list them off. Explain how you actually use them in your process.
So something like, I always double check my measurements with a micrometer and compare them to the blueprints. I also use a dial indicator to make sure the workpiece is centered properly.
Exactly. They'll probably ask you to go even deeper, like, tell me about a time you caught a mistake before it became a big problem.
Okay, that's where you could show them you pay attention to the details and that you're good at solving problems.
Okay, let's say you've got multiple projects going on at the same time. How do you handle that?
Sounds like a question they'd ask. How do you prioritize your workload when you're working on multiple projects at the same time?
You got it. Time management is huge in any workshop.
So how do you answer this one?
Don't just say, I'm organized, that's not enough. Walk them through your system. Do you use a priority list? Maybe you color code stuff. Whatever works for you, tell them about it, but make it clear and easy to understand.
So you might say, I use a whiteboard to keep track of my progress and make sure I'm meeting all the deadlines. And I always make sure to communicate with the team so everyone's on the same page.
Right. And don't be surprised if they hit you with follow-up questions like, how do you handle it when you've got multiple deadlines happening at the same time, or if a project suddenly changes?
That's where you can really show them you're adaptable and you're a team player.
Exactly. Okay, here's another important one they might ask. What do you do if a machine suddenly breaks down or starts acting up? Stuff happens.
Machines aren't perfect.
Hmm.
So they're really asking about troubleshooting and staying calm when things go wrong.
Right. So tell them about your process. Do you start by looking things over? Do you have a list you go through to figure out what's wrong?
Or maybe you're really good at listening for sounds that tell you something's not right.
Yeah, exactly. So you could say something like, the first thing I do is try to figure out what kind of problem it is. Is it mechanical, electrical, something else? Then I check the machine's manual to see if there's a common issue, like maybe a worn out bearing or a loose connection.
That shows them, how to figure things out.
Yep. And they might ask you to tell them about a time when you had to get creative to fix a machine problem.
That's a good chance to talk about a time you were resourceful and came up with a clever solution.
All right, another question they might ask is about setting up the lathe. Explain how you get a metalworking lathe ready for a new project.
This is where you show you're detail-oriented and that you can work on your own.
You got it. Don't just say, I follow the directions. Walk them through your process step by step. Like, first, you inspect the machine, then you pick the right tools, then you make sure the workpiece is secure, and then you set the cutting parameters.
So you could say something like, I always start by cleaning and oiling the machine. Then I pick out the right cutting tools for the material and how I want it to look in the end. Next, I carefully line up and secure the workpiece before setting things like the speed, the feed rate, and how deep the cut should be.
Perfect. Now, they might try to see how you adapt to different situations by asking, have you ever had to change how you usually set things up because of a weird material or a tricky design?
That's your chance to show them you can handle anything they throw at you and that you're always willing to go the extra mile.
Okay, let's move on to something super important, safety. They will definitely ask about this.
Right, like how do you keep yourself and others safe when you're using a metalworking lathe?
Yep. This is where you show them that you know your safety procedures and that you're serious about keeping everyone safe.
So don't just say, I wear safety glasses.
Right. You got to go deeper than that. Talk about specific things like wearing gloves, ear protection, and steel-toed boots. Mention lockout-hagout procedures, how machines are guarded, and what to do in an emergency. Anything that shows them you're all about safety.
You could say something like, before I even touch a lathe, I always make sure the check guard is in place and that I can reach the emergency stop button. I always wear all the necessary safety gear like safety glasses, gloves, and hearing protection. And I never use a machine unless I've been properly trained on how to use it safely.
Exactly. And be ready for them to follow up with stuff like, how do you stay up to date on any changes to safety rules? This shows them you're always learning and trying to be better.
So tell them about any industry publications you read, online resources, or safety training courses you've taken, anything that helps you stay informed.
All right, so we've talked a lot about safety, but what about the quality of the actual work?
Yeah, good point. They might ask, how do you ensure the final product is high quality when you're operating a metalworking lathe?
This is where you show them that you're dedicated to producing top-notch work.
It's about going above and beyond just meeting the bare minimum requirements.
Exactly. Tell them about how you inspect the finished product. Do you use calipers and micrometers to double-check the measurements? Do you look for any tiny flaws? Be specific about your process.
So you might say, I use a variety of precision tools to make absolutely sure the piece meets all the requirements. I also carefully inspect each piece for any scratches, burrs, or anything else that shouldn't be there. If I find something that doesn't meet our standards, I take care of it right away.
Great. And be ready for those follow-up questions that test your problem-solving skills. They might ask, what steps do you take if you notice a quality issue that needs to be addressed?
That's where you can show off your communication skills and how you work with others to solve problems.
Okay, now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about staying current in the world of metalworking, which is always changing.
They'll probably ask something like, how do you stay up to date with the latest metalworking lathe technologies and techniques?
Right, and this shows them that you're not just looking for a job, but a career where you can grow and keep learning.
So how do you make your answers stand out?
Be specific. Instead of just saying, I read trade magazines, name the specific magazines you read. If you go to industry events, tell them which ones. If you're part of online forums, tell them which ones and what you get out of them.
Okay, so instead of I read industry magazines, you'd say something like, I'm a subscriber to Modern Machine Shop and Production Machining, and I'm also active in the Practical Machinist Forum.
Exactly. Be specific and show them you're genuinely interested in staying ahead of the curve.
And be ready for follow-up questions like, what new technology in metalworking are you most excited about? That's where you can really show off your passion and knowledge.
Exactly. Okay, before we move on, let's take a quick detour and talk about something that can really help you nail these interview questions. RoleCatcher's AI tools.
Yeah, those are super useful. We touched on them earlier, but I'm curious, how can AI help you specifically with those tougher behavioral questions?
Think about it this way. You record yourself answering a question like, tell me about a time you had to overcome a challenging machining problem. RoleCatcher's AI will analyze your answer for content, but also for things like clarity, how concise it is, even your tone of voice.
So it's like having a personal interview coach right there,
Yeah,
giving you feedback.
you got it. It might suggest ways to make your answer more interesting, highlight your problem-solving skills better, or even address things that might be concerning the interviewer.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It takes the guesswork out of getting ready for those tricky questions.
Right, and the more you practice with it, the more confident you'll become in the actual interview. It's like having a secret weapon.
Totally. Okay, so that wraps up part one of our deep dive. We've talked about what a metalworking lathe operator does, the career aspects, and we've even tackled a bunch of those interview questions.
And we can't forget about how RoleCatcher's AI tools can help you prepare. We'll be back with more advice and tips to help you rock that interview.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So we just covered some of those common questions they might ask you in a metalworking lathe operator interview. And now let's zoom out and look at the big picture of your career.
Right, and we've got those RoleCatcher career guides handy. What's the most important thing someone who's thinking about this career should know?
The metalworking world is changing all the time. You've got automation coming in, new materials, advanced techniques. It's a lot to keep up with. But the good news is the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts a 6% growth in this industry over the next 10 years.
Wow, that's pretty big. So there's a lot of demand for skilled operators who can keep up with all that change, right?
Exactly. It's not just about more jobs, it's about new opportunities too. You could end up in a more specialized role, working with cutting-edge tech, all sorts of things.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's say someone gets this job. What are some of the pros and cons they should know about?
Well, when there's high demand, that usually means good job security and maybe even higher pay. Plus, there's a lot of room to move up. You could become a supervisor, specialize in a certain type of lathe work, or even move into design or engineering with the right training.
So it's not just a job, it's a whole career path.
Exactly. But of course, there are some downsides.
Mm-hmm.
It can be pretty physically demanding. You're on your feet a lot, you're dealing with heavy stuff, and there's always the risk of getting hurt if you're not careful with safety procedures.
And some of the tasks can get repetitive, right? Which might not be for everyone.
True, you gotta weigh those things. So if you're just starting out, what's the best way to get into this field?
What do you think?
Apprenticeships are a fantastic way to go. You get on-the-job training, plus you're learning in a classroom setting, so you get both the practical stuff and the theory.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about personal projects? Can those help? We talked about that a bit earlier.
Definitely. When you build things in your spare time, it shows you're passionate and you take initiative. So if you've got a bunch of cool things you've made on the lathe, take some pictures and put together a portfolio. You could put it on LinkedIn, a website, or even just have a folder of pictures to show during your interview.
That's a great way to show them what you can do beyond what's on your resume.
Yep. And what about for people who are already in the field and want to move up?
What advice do you have for them?
Never stop learning. There are always advanced training courses you can take. You can get certified in certain lathe operations or CNC programming. You could even get an associate's degree in machining technology. All of that shows you're serious about your career.
So it's all about constantly learning and improving.
Yeah, especially in a field that's changing as fast as this one. And don't underestimate the power of networking. Go to industry events, join professional organizations, connect with other machinists online. You never know what might come out of it.
Speaking of opportunities, let's get back to those interview questions. We were talking about behavioral questions, and I think there's one that's really relevant to career growth, right?
You're talking about how do you stay up to date with the latest metalworking lathe technologies and techniques. This question is super important because it shows them that you're not just looking for any job. You're looking for a career where you can grow and learn new things.
Exactly. So how do you answer this question in a way that really impresses them?
Show them you're proactive and you're always learning. Don't just say, I read trade publications. Tell them the specific publications you read, the industry events you go to, the online forums you're a part of. Be specific.
I see. So instead of saying, I read industry magazines, you'd say something like, I subscribe to Modern Machine Shop and Production Machining, and I'm also active in the Practical Machinist Forum.
That's the idea. The more specific you are, the more it shows them that you're really invested in staying on top of things in this field. And be ready for them to ask follow-up questions like, what new technology in metalworking are you most excited about? That's where you can really let your passion and knowledge shine through.
So it's all about being a lifelong learner and staying curious.
Right? Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about a tool that can really help you fine-tune your answers to these interview questions. RoleCatcher's AI features.
Right, we talked about those earlier.
Yeah.
How can AI specifically help you with those behavioral questions?
Imagine this. You record yourself answering a question like, tell me about a time you had to overcome a difficult machining problem. RoleCatcher's AI can analyze your answer, not just what you say, but how you say it, how clear you are, how concise you are, even your tone of voice.
So it's like having your own personal interview coach giving you feedback.
Exactly. It might give you suggestions on how to make your answer more engaging, how to highlight your problem-solving skills, or even how to address things the interviewer might be worried about.
That's pretty amazing. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of preparing for those tougher questions.
For sure. And the more you practice with it, the more confident and polished you'll sound in the actual interview.
It's like a cheat code for job interviews.
Oh.
Okay, before we wrap up this part, Let's do a quick recap of what we've talked about so far when it comes to building a career as a metalworking lathe operator.
We started by talking about how the industry is constantly changing and how there's a big demand for skilled operators. Then we looked at the pros and cons, things like job security and opportunities to move up, but also the physical demands and the potential risks.
We also talked about how to get started in the field, highlighting things like apprenticeships and personal projects. And then we talked about the importance of always learning and networking, especially if you want to move up in your career.
And of course, we went deeper into those interview questions, focusing on the behavioral questions that really show off your skills and experience.
Right? Those behavioral questions are all about showing them what you've actually done in real life situations.
Exactly. And we can't forget about RoleCatcher's AI tools. Those can give you some amazing feedback and help you really refine your answers.
So we've covered a ton of ground already, but we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll wrap things up with some essential tips for acing that interview and leaving a great impression. We'll also talk about how to use everything we've learned to build a successful and fulfilling career as a metalworking lathe operator. So stay tuned. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into metalworking lathe operator interviews. We've covered a ton, the role, the industry, those tough questions, and we even talked about how AI can give you a real edge in your job search.
Yeah, we've pretty much taken you through the whole process. Now it's time to put it all together so you can walk into that interview feeling confident and ready to go.
Okay, so let's say you're sitting in the waiting room, about to be called in. What are some last-minute things to keep in mind?
First things first, take a deep breath and remember all the work you've put into preparing. You got this. And make sure you're dressed professionally. Even if the workshop itself is casual, showing up looking sharp tells them you're serious about this opportunity.
It's all about that first impression. So what about once the interview actually starts? What should you really focus on?
Eye contact is huge. Make sure you're really listening to what the interviewer is asking, and when you answer, be thoughtful and to the point. Oh, and don't forget enthusiasm. Let them see how much you love metalworking.
Right, it's not just about knowing the answers, it's about showing them you're genuinely interested.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, what about asking questions?
Super important. Asking good questions shows you're engaged and you want to learn more. It's good to have a few questions ready beforehand, but don't be afraid to ask about something that comes up during the conversation.
So what kind of questions should people ask?
You could ask about the company culture, the team you'd be working with, the kinds of projects they do, or any opportunities to learn and grow.
Those are all great questions that show you're thinking about the bigger picture.
Oh,
Okay, let's talk about something people sometimes forget, the follow-up.
you're right. Sending a thank you note can go a long way. It shows you're still interested and that you appreciated their time.
Should you send an email or a handwritten note?
Email is usually the best way to go, especially if you want to get it to them quickly. But a handwritten note can be a nice personal touch if you have the time.
Either way, make sure to thank them and reiterate your interest in the position.
Exactly. All right, let's take a step back and look at everything we've talked about in this deep dive.
We started with the basics, what a metalworking lathe operator does, the skills they need, the environment they work in. Then we talked about the career itself, the trends, the pros and cons, how to get started, and how to move up.
We spent a good chunk of time going over those interview questions, both the technical stuff about lathes and the behavioral questions that show them what you can really do.
And we talked about how RoleCatcher's AI tools can be a huge help. They can help you tailor your resume, practice your answers, and get insights that'll give you an edge.
It's like we've taken you from a raw piece of metal to a finished product.
I like that analogy. So what's the most important thing for anyone prepping for a metalworking lathe operator interview to remember?
Preparation is everything. The more you know about the role, the industry, the company, and the types of questions they ask, the better off you'll be. And don't forget about those AI tools. They can give you some really valuable feedback.
It's about taking your potential and shaping it into a successful interview.
Exactly. And one last thought. Let your enthusiasm and passion for metalworking shine through. That'll make a lasting impression.
That's great advice. Well, I think we've covered everything you need to know to rock that metalworking lathe operator interview.
Remember, with the right preparation and a positive attitude, you got this. Good luck.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We wish you all the best in your job search.